Welcome to the Legendarium Green Team. I'm your host, Kyptan, and with me today are Eradandis
Hello.
and Little Red Book.
Hello.
Today, we'll be continuing our discussion of the Uplift Storm trilogy, finishing off Infinity's Shore. Because this is a middle book, except for a brief spoiler-light section about general impressions, most of this episode will contain spoilers for the Uplift Storm trilogy. We'll give you a warning before that happens, but it's very hard to talk about the middle of a book series without betraying something of the plot of the first book.
Can we just say spoilers for like the whole thing? Like
We're going
we've
to
read
do
too.
one question and then we're going to do spoilers for the whole thing, okay? So how did you like the book? Did it work for you? And where would you rate it compared to the other Uplift novels?
I like this book quite a bit. It's very enjoyable. It's starting to suffer from getting a little too spread out. I think I mentioned that in the last podcast, but it's a lot of fun and there's lots of cool action and it's talking about like I don't know if I can say that without spoiling, so I won't.
Okay. Where would you rate this in comparison to the other Uplift books?
Let me think. So I still haven't done Heaven's Reach yet. I think, not counting Sundiver, I think it's probably, I don't know, guys. I should have been prepared for this question. I would say Startide Rising is still my favorite. And then Uplift War, I would say pretty much in the order that the books are written, or
Really?
how I'm feeling about it right now. Yeah. I mean, but they're all good in the order that they were published, except for Sundiver,
Cool.
which is way at the bottom.
Era, how about you?
I think it suffers from middle bookitis, but it's a really, it's an excellent book. It really is. Actually, when I reread the ending this time, I was actually reminded a little bit of The Empire Strikes Back, where the way it ends versus the way the next part begins. So anyways, it was a really good book. I would put it, if I look at the whole galaxy of Bryn books, excluding Sundiver, I think the galaxy of the top books in the series, in some order, are Startide Rising, Uplift War, and Heaven's Reach. And then I think there's a fight for co-second place between Brightness Reef and Infinity Shore. So I would say Brightness Reef and Infinity Shore is a step below Startide Rising, Uplift War, and Heaven's Reach. But you're asking me to pick which baby I like the least. I love all my babies, just in different ways.
Just Sundiver least.
Sundiver least.
But I mean, so what I'll say about Sundiver is I don't think that was Bryn's baby. That was something he had to do to get published. You know what I mean? Like he had to adhere to a formula. Does that make sense?
I still think there were parts of it that were his baby. I think he really enjoyed all of the like stellar physics that he got to display in that book. I think that was very exciting for him.
There's one point I want to make about Infinity Shore that I realized this reread. Startide Rising and Uplift War, like if you can imagine like somebody new who comes on the scene of your profession, whatever it is, and they're a hot shot and they're just blasting away and they're just blowing people's minds. And you're like, wow, this is incredible. And then the person fades from the scene and you kind of forget about him. He comes to the background and then he comes back and you're like, this isn't as good as I remembered, but he's matured and he's become more subtle. He's still just as good as he was before. It's just, he makes you work for it a little bit more. And that's kind of my impression of Bryn, Startide Rising, Uplift War versus Brightness Reef, Infinity Shore. The quality is still there, but he's become a more subtle writer in the meantime, and he's making you work for it more, which personally I like.
You say he's become a more subtle writer, but reading through Infinity Shore, I see all the points where he's like banging you over the head with something as a tease, because he loves to end a chapter on a cliffhanger. And he loves to have his characters like staring off into space thinking something profound. But the problem is they're often staring off into space thinking something profound, and it's the same thing for like 3 chapters in a row.
I think that is a legitimate criticism.
Because he doesn't want you to like actually get the realization moment until he's time to release it in the story. And a lot of those, the time to release it in the story is not in this book. It's later on. But the astute reader's probably gotten it way before then.
I have so many questions.
Okay.
What do you think,
so yeah,
Chip?
I think it used to be one of my favorites. I used to put this above Brightness Reef, but now I'm going to put it below Brightness Reef. Because now I recognize that not every book needs flashy science fiction elements that are like full-on spaceships and robots and all those sort of fun things in order to be an enjoyable and well-written story. I was really young when I read these books, and I spent most of Brightness Reef being like, okay, where's the spaceships? Where's the spaceships? And Infinity Shore certainly has one. On the cover, you can see giant spaceship.
I'll say this: there's probably some way to have written Brightness Reef and Infinity Shore and make it Brightness Shore, Infinity's Reef, something. There's a way to have done that. There's a way to have done that. So,
I agree. I think Infinity Shore could have probably been 20% lighter.
Yes.
I agree.
There's, like I said, it starts to suffer from just a little too much high on your own supply.
Just a few too many viewpoints. Just a few too many. And a little bit too broken up.
Well, I'll say this. One, I sent you guys offline, but I'll tell everybody. Bryn has admitted that he's only written 2 books on outline. Everything else, he just he puts the pen down, and what comes out, comes out. And this is very, very evident in Infinity Shore. So, for better and worse. For better and worse.
I think at one point in an interview, he said something along the lines of, yes, I have committed the worst of literary sins. I sat down to write a book, and instead it became a trilogy. And that's not normally his style. And I think The Uplift Storm is his only trilogy that he's ever written. And I think you can tell it's partly because it was a labor of love and a passion project, and he just let things go where they led him. But
it got a little out of control.
It weakened it a little bit. It weakened his stellar writing just a little bit.
I would say this, because you were talking about POVs. Let me kind of come back on that. I had a realization about it, and it's actually made reading it a little bit easier this time around. I'm not looking at each particular person as a different POV. We're looking at the Streaker crew. This is the concept of what Streaker represents. That's the character. And so all the parts that we're talking about, those are parts of that concept being represented. When we're talking about Jijo, whether it's Reddy or Lark or whoever, it's what does Jijo represent being represented through the story. Same thing with the Galactic Civilization. At least for me, that made it easier for me to read this time.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. So it might be a good way to approach it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of POVs. So.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump into full spoiler territory.
Woo-hoo.
Listeners, tune out now if you haven't finished the book, or if you don't care about spoilers, keep coming. Okay. So I have to take one moment at the start of this to say I'm so happy we have haikus again.
Yes.
Proper dolphin haikus. And I just want to say one of my favorites.
Okay. Go ahead.
This is by Ka to Peepo when they're going off to the volcanic island to go spy on on Mount Gwen. In summer sunlight, fish attract like edible singularities.
That's nice.
Right before then, I think, we get a piece of internal monologue from Ka talking about how the best trinary haikus express all 3 stages of dolphin life, both underwater unintelligent animals, underwater intelligent animals as they get uplifted, and then finally the link to space, where dolphins are the premier pilots of the galaxy. And that haiku in just 3 lines manages to express all 3 of those elements.
That's true. Another point about the haiku that I don't know if you've noticed already. Have you noticed the ending of Infinity Shore, the ending of Brightness Reef? Like they both end in poem, usually either very close to it, but there's a trinary haiku, or Emerson and Song every time.
Yep.
Yes. Emerson and Song had a fantastic ending to Infinity Shore that I just loved. I can pull it up right now. When the winter's typhoon pounds you onto sand grains sharp and gleaming, and creation all conspiring breaks you on a time of changes, at the moment when breath falters and your lifeblood pours out streaming, cast around that bright reef, dear friend, for a gift to grant another, for some way to repay forward all the favors you were given, for in good time prospects glitter far along infinity's shore.
I might have cried when I read that.
It's not beautiful. I mean, seriously. I mean,
it is beautiful.
To take it out, just take it out of context of the entire story. Just read that like in the class as a poem. It's amazing. Like, sincerely.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic.
100%. It's great.
Bryn has poetic chops.
Yeah.
He really does. I mean, and when you think about the fact that he also incorporates all this super heavy sci-fi stuff that honestly makes my eyes start to glaze over in a few spots.
That's funny. That's the
I,
part I like the best.
I love those parts.
I actually, in our group chat, I said, I can tell which parts Kip likes because it just starts to get turned into blah 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 for me. I'm sorry. I don't think I'm
Well,
dumb. I just don't think I have the reference for it, I guess.
I would say this: unlike a lot of other kinds of science fiction novels, this isn't technobabble. I mean,
No,
it
I know
really. I
it's
mean,
not.
it's
mostly, except where the sci stuff
I,
comes in.
right,
Well, yeah,
right.
that
When he starts talking about, like, hyperspace, whatever, fine. But like when he's talking about this is what the star does, or this is what, like, how the oceans act, that's straight science being given to you, and
no,
it's
that's
awesome.
not
Like,
that's
yeah.
not my argument. My point is that I don't have a reference point for it. Does that make sense?
Got it. No, fair enough. Fair enough.
I love the sequences where they're around the star Ismanuti and they
Mhm.
describe its colossal size,
Yeah.
larger than the radius of most solar systems. You really get the sense of scale that these galactic civilizations are operating under. And then you get the
Well,
sense of scale where, wait, how did this egg, this holy egg, cause some sort of solar flare storm in this giant star
And
light minutes, light hours away?
and opened up a new
And
portal,
open up a
basically.
new dimensional nexus, indeed.
Yeah, yeah.
well, not only that. I mean, let me take the contrasting point to kind of emphasize, like, how good
We're still
Bryn
on
is as a
science
writer.
talk here right now. But
No, no, no,
yeah.
no, no. I just want to show the contrast. Like, you have the grandeur of the science and everything that's being shown, and the scale in which galactic civilization is working, and then he brings you back to Jijo, and it's all about the tragedy of the human condition. I mean, it's all about, like, I think I don't really have a better way to say it than that. So, and I love the
Okay.
way Bryn contrasts that. The amazing, like, let your mind wander with the science, and then he kind of brings you back to the reality of Jijo.
If you want to talk about the human tragedy on Jijo, would you consider the idea that this series has changed genres a little bit since Brightness Reef? I know you've been on about
On and
Infinity
on.
Shore being a tragedy.
It ends on a suicide mission. I don't know how much more tragedy it
Right?
gets than that.
It does
It
end on a
literally
suicide
ends on
mission.
a suicide mission. I mean, like, we are going to sacrifice ourselves to save people on Jijo. We are feeding Jijo with dolphins on the chance that they can survive, and we are going to sacrifice ourselves.
And
You literally have the pilot of the ship having to make a decision. Do I let the love of my life be kidnapped and repeatedly abused? I'm just going to use that word. And do I try and save her, or do I get on the ship on the suicide mission? And he chooses the ship. I mean, it ends. It's a tragedy, and I agree with you. It does change genres.
interestingly, the people who are planning the suicide mission are our most optimistic characters. So Jillian and Sarah are both very optimistic people. And Sarah figures out the thing with the new portal, and she goes to Jillian and she's like, hey, this new portal opened up. Maybe we should do that, even though it's not going to be ready for a couple.
Yeah.
Pause for a
We
second
might
on
have to cut
Sarah.
that last little bit might be
No, we will
spoiler.
get to Sarah later. I
Okay.
promise.
All right. Okay. Good. All right. Never mind. Then I'll shut up. Okay. Well, what are you're making faces when I was talking, Kip? What do you think?
I think it did change genres a little bit, but I think it mostly changed a subgenre just because of the huge increase in the ambient technology level available to people. But I think that this is the book where we start to identify what the egg was saying all along. And it's where the egg is given a specific one word statement, and that is hope. The egg's like base impulse that it's been sending out all along is hope. And I think that that's what the reader's supposed to have in Infinity Shore. That's what the reader is supposed to feel, supposed to be affected by during the reading of this story.
So I'm going to agree with you there. And one thing I found very interesting about the whole thing with the egg is it actually required every single sentient being on the, or representative, not every single sentient being, but all the representatives. We find out there's 8 now,
Well, 8 at the minimum.
that we know about.
They talk about like adding in chimps and Lornix and Zookers and those other species.
Yes. But the point is that they are the ones who had to gather together to ignite the egg. Or maybe
Yep.
it was just time, but they had to ignite the egg by joining their music together.
One of my favorite parts of the book.
The interesting thing about what's going on is you get a huge insight, especially towards the end of the book, in galactic politics. And you're finding out that the galactic order is falling apart. And that's why the Rothon and the Jifer and the Jofer, sorry, and the praying mantis people, who I still can't remember
The
their name.
Tandu.
The Tandu, and all these other groups feel empowered because of the finding of Herbie to, and for those of you don't remember, Herbie's the mummy they found, the really, really old mummy,
Yep.
to rise up and overthrow the galactic order, which we know has been overthrown at least 3 other times that we know about for sure.
Yes.
And then right at the very end of the book, you find out that, and
No, we don't.
no, it is.
That's
'cause
Heaven's
I wrote
Reach.
it. Nope, that's in my note. Or they at least talk about them. Maybe they just talk about them.
There's a definite discussion of the different orders of intelligences at the end of
Yes.
Infinity Shore. You're thinking of that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what I'm thinking about is the whole galaxy has been cordoned off. It's all fallow, not
Yep.
just the planet. And the thought was that it was because of the Zang.
That's right.
Yes.
That's
That's
what
true.
I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kip.
I'll say this is that the Alamo is at the same time gives hope to the rest of America that we can win this war or whatever it is against the Mexicans or whatever, right? And it's still tragic. Jijo is in the same vein, a noble last stand for potentially humanity's last survivors. And at the same time, there's this one little beam of hope, possibly. And it ends on a depressing note. In the same way that the Empire Strikes Back. Luke, I am your father. No, and then he goes falls and he ends with his hand chopped off. He's got his butt kicked. His best friend's in carbonite. It doesn't end well for him in the Empire Strikes Back, right? I mean, so in the same way, Infinity Shore just doesn't end well for the people we're following as the protagonists.
Absolutely doesn't end well, but unlike the Alamo, not everyone is dead at the end of Infinity Shore yet.
That's true.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting an Alamo reference.
Okay.
I would say that Earth might be the Alamo, though.
Ooh, that's an interesting thought. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay. Here's my quick recap, but so we can go into specific level 1 points a bit more. The Wufan's dreamers are joined on Stricker by Dwer and Reddy and a bunch of captive Jofer. Kun and Jas are found dead before they can be questioned, but the Jofer are baited by the Nis Machine and Huck into divulging more than they intended. Ka's subordinates mutiny and kidnap Peepo, his new love. Jillian and Ka make contact with Wufan's port and trade with the locals. Somewhat unexpectedly, the kids, Sarah and Reddy, choose to accompany Streaker on her desperate plight. Meanwhile, Lark and Ling are imprisoned on the Jofer ship and questioned by Ewax. That name I have no idea how to pronounce. But the Trachea rings of Len and assist them in escaping into the vast bowels of the ship. Finally, all the pieces are in place, and it's time for Jillian to execute her plan, launching Streaker back into space. Using decoys of booby-trapped Urish hot air balloons and swarms of revived Buyer ships, Streaker makes her way to the fires of Ismanuti, with the Polk Jahis hot on her heels and gaining. Through another quirk of fate, Reddy, Yi, and Dwer are reunited inside the string of Toporgic capture bubbles that the Jofer are trailing behind them. How's that?
It was good. I was
Cool.
just making faces about Reddy. Oh my god.
Now let's talk about my favorite Trachea.
Ready? No, it's fine.
Reddy's
ahead.
not tricky.
He might as well be.
You heard favorite and thought Reddy. You are trying to troll me, Miss Sir.
Reddy's just like a masquerade just wandering around all by itself.
Oh my god.
I actually kind of really like that.
Let's talk about somebody who got a brand new master ring and has found new and innovative ways to befuddle, deceive, and counteract that ring. Asks.
Oh, Guys, this is one of my favorite things.
In this book, we get clues that he's been like hiding his independence
Mm-hmm. It's great. I love it.
in key moments of conflict and opportunity. He's able to take over temporary control from the Master Ring and do things to help. Honestly, he helps Jijo, the Slope, and Streaker through just like really two main acts of disobedience. Manages to make such an effect on the story.
So he molts little baby rings.
Little baby
That
rings.
little baby rings. And one is like a magic, whatever.
Pheromones
Ring.
fewer.
Yep.
Yep.
It's a multipass.
Exactly. And then this other one that we don't know what it does. And then
It's injured.
it's hurt because Ron hurts it. Ron stomps
Ron is a bad word that I won't say right now.
on it. Yes, he is. He's not a
A
good
jerk.
person. Yeah. My word would begin with a B.
Mine was going to start with A.
Oh, okay.
You said the B word is not a bad word.
I don't think is a bad word. Kip disagrees with me.
Great. I have a bleep now I have to add.
I mean, they read a series called The Gentleman.
I'm being the good one today.
You are. You know what? It's not hard to be better than Red in this matter. Okay.
No, it's not. Anyway, but the point is the little red one gets stomped on, and then they have a purple multipass. And then you find out that the master rings, they have something built into them. And I'm trying to remember what exactly it's called, but basically it's like you can set something off and all the master rings go into like a coma or whatever.
Dormancy. Yeah.
Yeah, dormancy.
Do
And
you want to know what my next bullet point is?
is it about dormancy?
The Jofer and the drawback.
The master ring, when it activates, like it gets overwhelmed and then it goes quiescent, and then they
Right.
no longer work for a while.
And it's like a built-in thing that their patrons gave them. At least that's the understanding I had.
The drawback, it's called, and
Yeah,
it's
the drawback.
capitalized.
Right. And it's a built-in flaw. Like it was purposely given to them. And I mean, that's once again, patrons messing with their clients in a really, really bad way. But Ask can use that period of the drawback to take control of the ship for a few moments and just stop it.
Yep.
And I loved it. He's a superhero, even though he's a sad, tragic superhero.
I was going to say that Ewasks, at the same time as it being a tragic, to me, it's a genuinely tragic arc that he's going on. It's like he's trapped in his own body and mind and trying to find a way to get out, right? And trying to find a way to help.
Yep.
At the same time that's going on, this Ewasks himself and our viewpoints through him are, to me, Bryn at his best, because he's showing us a truly alien thought pattern and species in a way that's truly alien. It really is, but in a way that's somehow presentable to us in words we can understand, but it's still not really understandable. Not really. I mean,
Yep.
If there is like a shining star to Infinity Shore, it is every paragraph or every chapter that has Ewasks in it, which I thought was brilliant.
It's excellent because unlike the first book where we see Asks' internal monologue, and it's really easy to buy into the idea that it's just some form of metacognition or like there's a unitary consciousness that does actually occur out of that. But when we see Ewasks, our point of view is from the Master Ring itself.
Right.
And so that is a unitary consciousness, sure. But we see all of these other things that we only through inference. We see all of the other rings making these actions. We see them doing these things of disobedience that we never get any sort of concrete internal monologue from. We just see the actions. And so we can see that there's a side to the story that we don't have direct access to, but it's
Right.
there. And it is indisputably there.
And it's fascinating.
And
It's
I was trying to find a way to kind of how to explain it. It's like imagine
it's
like
brave.
you're walking around. Yeah, imagine walking around and like your hand reaches out and starts doing something. You're like, what is my hand doing? And then your
Yep.
hand independently does something. And you're like, no, then you have to consciously grab control of your arm, your hand, and make it come back. I mean, that's the closest analogy I could think of. And Asks is like probably out of all the Jijoans, he's truly the bravest because he knows he's
Truly.
dead. I mean,
yeah.
all those rings unanimously voted to move towards the Jofer ship.
Mhm.
Yep.
And we see that act of bravery repeated and echoing throughout every interaction afterwards, because he's trying so hard to disrupt them from the inside. And I mean, it definitely worked.
Yeah, it really did.
Couldn't have expected how well it would work. Couldn't have expected that Lark's little ring piece of the egg that he wears around his neck would turn into a bomb.
Yeah, that was
And that he
amazing.
would
I
be
love that
able to
part.
throw it at the captain stack. But
So I just want to bring us down just a little bit from all this heady stuff we're talking about. Guys, there's a lot of really cool and fun fight scenes and explosions in this book.
Mhm.
It is so much fun.
and a love story.
Yes.
If we're jumping on that, my absolute favorite part of the whole, like if we're talking about cool action scenes, my favorite part of the whole thing, like in that last part, where the Jijo one's going, yeah, we got rockets and we know how to use them, and they take out the Corvette, and everyone's like, what the hell just happened, right? And that's just an epic moment, because that point of view of what happened recurs to like 3 or 4 chapters, because everybody's like, what the hell? And it's worth,
Yeah.
worth dwelling on, right? That same point actually brings up a level 2 point that Bryn has been actually talking about since Startide Rising, which we can come back to. Or we can address it now, whatever you want.
What's it about specifically?
Knowledge.
Oh, we'll
Because
come back to that.
no. Okay. Okay.
I have thoughts too.
How much did you like the whole city of Wufan's port, looking at the semaphore station on the mountain and watching the reports from the rocket attack in real time,
Oh, that was
being like,
fun.
the sages, they developed rockets. They fired. They fly. They kill a Jofer. And then the ones heading towards the main ship, you hear the frantic pounding of the anti-aircraft guns on the Jofer battleship. And then you hear them become less frantic. And then, nope, none of the rockets hit. No damage done. And now they're angry.
That's not tragic
That-
at all, is it?
That was
No. Not at all.
Hey,
No.
They got
Era-
they got the Corvette.
What
They
about
got the Corvette.
Era's hammering this thing, isn't he?
They got the Corvette. They got the Jofer down
They
to
got the
one desperate ship. And you know what? Jillian can work with that.
Yep, she sure can, because she's the boss.
She's a boss.
She only needs to draw one ship into the transfer point to suicide. She can work with that.
Speaking of which, I mean, look, I do want to take just a brief moment here to tip my hat to Bryn, because we have a completely, absolute bad commander-in-chief who's just like gets them out scrape after scrape. The commander-in-chief happens to be female. No one cares. Literally no one cares about her gender. It's just part of the background, and she's just treated for the bad that she is. And that's the way Bryn writes for the entire series, and I love it. So
He can say bad, but I can't say.
I'm
the
gonna
word I
bleep it.
said. We're leaving it in on our action movie one, just so you know.
Fine. I'm bleeping this one.
Okay, fine, whatever. She's amazing, and she's so smart.
She is one of my favorite characters, to be sure. And we will, yeah.
we got to save her for Heaven's Reach.
One thing I would like to say about Jillian is that she is insecure, but it does not affect her actions. She constantly has doubts about herself. She constantly compares herself to Tom and to Krydecki and to Jacob Demois. She compares herself to her mentors and her companions and says, what would they do? And then she says, doesn't really matter what they would do because it's what I'm going to do that matters. And she makes her own plans, her own way. And she's like, I don't even know if I can call this a scheme, but I'm going to try it anyways.
That is, the insecurity is always internal. The only time you ever see it is when you get it from Jillian's viewpoint, because to everybody else, she's ice cold in a good way. She's in absolute control. She knows what she's doing.
I would say there's one exception to that. I would say that when she asks Ka to leave Jijo, to leave Pipo,
Look, we got to talk about that.
you got to leave your love. And just like I left mine, she doesn't even say that, but Ka knows it.
Right.
And also, Ka knows that Tom and Jillian are way more serious couple than him and Pipo, who are like brand new boyfriend, girlfriend. But Tom and Pipo are the more relatable couple. Not everyone is a star-crossed lover.
Can we talk about that now?
We're going to.
Calm
Let's
people.
talk about Ka and Peepo and those horrible dolphins, Zaki and Mopal.
Yeah, and the weird thing about that I just learned not that long ago is that dolphins really do things like rape
Yep.
each other.
Yep, they
That's
do.
a thing that's real that I
Yep.
didn't know.
Yep, dolphins are one of the few animals that commits what can be called premeditated rape
And
Yep.
murder. They'll murder well,
and
Yes.
murder.
lions do that too. They'll murder all the cubs. But anyway.
Yep. And also necrophilia. Woo, dolphins.
Oh,
Yay.
okay.
The point I want to make is, look, Bryn goes into some pretty dark territory here, absolutely dark territory, and I've heard on the Discord server and also on other podcasts about how it's no good. Like, we really need to steer away from these dark topics. In my opinion, not only do I think you shouldn't steer away, you should steer into it, because what safer space is there to do than words on a page, right? And then you get to explore your emotions about it and confront harsh realities in a safe space. And Brim brings us to an unfortunate reality. Sometimes you can't save the person. Sometimes you can't. And that person's going to suffer. And that's the reality, right? And it's heart-wrenching.
I am
So-
all for exploring difficult topics in literature. You guys know that Broken Earth is one of my favorite series of all time, and this one is too. And even though as a child reading about the rape and capture of Peepo was very disturbing, I still found it very emotionally connecting, and I thought it was a moving storyline. It gave strong motivation to Ka. It connected me in a way that I probably wouldn't have cared about otherwise. But you can't just throw these things in because you want to like make your book darker and edgier. You can't just like say, "Oh, I'm going to fill my book with rape because that will get it critical appeal."
I don't
You
think
know.
that's what he was doing. And
No,
I don't
like-
think
I don't think Bryn was doing that. God no.
No, gratuitousness is not what I was talking about. So
Yeah.
right. I was
Yeah.
going to say it's not gratuitous. The way it's handled is not
I think it's very common though, especially in certain young
grimdark.
adults and in Grimdark to just throw it in because you want to check off a box
Right. Or you want to be a serious,
or edgy.
edgy or serious, or, you
Yep.
know, like you're really dealing with real things.
Yep.
But I mean, in a lot of ways, the whole plot line with Peepo makes sense. It's the dolphins are agitating to reproduce. They're feeling constrained and they want to stay. And Peepo's like apparently the hottest dolphin on the ship, I guess, or something.
She's a hot nurse.
Right, exactly. She's the hot nurse. And as we've already discussed, dolphins actually do things like this.
Yep.
So they're like, we want to go reproduce, and here's the hot nurse, and we're going to take her off, and we're done with Streaker. We did not sign up for this.
Young males in dolphin society, actual dolphin pods, will often attempt to kidnap young female dolphins and take them away from the pod and try
So
and
what-
start their own thing.
It seems like a real natural, natural. It seems like a natural plot line.
Well, I was about to look. We've had books that people on this podcast do not like because there's the use of rape in the story itself. And my point is that is it gratuitous or is it not, right? And if it's not, then it's something you just have to grapple with and deal with and address. You've talked about Broken Earth, which I think my feelings of it are well known on the Trilogies podcast. Go and listen, everybody. Or Thomas Covenant's another one which we disagree on, but it's not used gratuitously, right?
I've never read it, so I don't disagree.
Thomas.
Anyways,
It is.
it's not used gratuitously.
Yes, it is.
But anyway, so and the point of it, it's not used gratuitously here either, but you're having to deal with it. And also related to this, I think this is another one of Bryn's clues that one of these hanging threads that we think are hanging is actually closed. This is yet another indication by Bryn to the reader, guys, Orly, Krydecki, all of them, they're dead. This is yet another clue.
no.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
Put a pin in this because we're gonna come back to heaven. We're gonna come back to this on Heaven's Reach. They're dead, guys. You can hold you can believe the unbelievable. We can, but I go where the truth takes me. I go where knowledge takes me. Okay.
Nope.
Shots fired, man. That
Well,
was
I'll go
mean.
where the clues take me. They're dead. Look, I love
Look.
them. They're heroes. Look, hey, this is a shout out to Drew. Heroes die.
A, Jillian would have felt if Tom died. They share an unmistakable, unbreakable connection. They are destined lovers, and I will not accept anything else. And B, she tried to reach out to him in a meditative trance. I love that section, by the way, where she does her
Yeah,
little
that was great.
starfish and zero G thing. For those of you who can't see the video, which is all of you, I just did a little starfish waving motions with my hands.
It was adorable.
And and she tried to connect to Tom Orley. She tried to enter a trance and search him out, but it was interrupted and ruined by the stupidness machine.
Well, and also she's having issues with the egg. Like she definitely connects with the egg during that trance.
She's also having issues where she doesn't trust herself to let her go too deep into a trance because she's carrying so much stress and can't have like a breakdown while she's captain of this vessel.
Let's
By
come
the
back
way,
to Heaven's Reach.
Okay.
it just makes me happy that you called the NIS machine stupid.
I mean, sometimes it is. And I do love all of the moments in this book where the NIS machine is about to tell Jillian something and she interrupts it and says what it was going to tell her. I love all those moments.
Okay, Era.
Okay.
You're wrong. Sorry.
From the Journal of Alvin Hufweu, they turned a mere adventure into an epic, but won't let us go home for fear we'd tell the tale. That's in the middle of Infinity Shore. But what do you think about the concept of the adventure that these kids have been on, that the Kulhan kids have been on, and that the Stranger has been on, and that honestly the Streaker had been on during their initial survey trip? What do you think of that adventure being turned into an epic? And what do you think about the standalone novels of the Uplift series being turned into a trilogy? Do you think that Bryn was purposefully making an illusion between the two there?
100%. We've known since Brightness Reef because Bryn goes out of his way to give us writing lessons in Alvin's journal. He
He
really,
does.
really does. So I don't think there's any question at all that this is Bryn speaking to the reader. Can you believe that I started writing the series and all of a sudden it's this? I mean, I have no doubt in my mind about it. He's kind of like winking and nodding to us and saying, hey, I get it. I get it too, right? I'm along
Yep.
for the ride as well. So,
And what do you think it says about each of the kids that they have all decided in Infinity Shore to move beyond their initial adventure and continue the path? Sarah goes on with Streaker. The Stranger reluctantly gets dragged along. The kids of Wufan's dream all go along, all march back into the jaws of death. What do you think it says about each of them?
Red, you want to go first?
No, because I'm thinking.
Okay. I think it's interesting because each of the kids, I think you can tell a little bit more about why each of the kids chose their path based on how their families reacted with them leaving, right? With the Urs, it was a practical decision. So to them, it was a logical decision. Bye, see you later, right? Whereas with Alvin, it was very emotional. You were doing something heroic, We know that our people up in the stars are kind of dour and kind of sourpusses. Don't be like that. Go out and have your grand adventures. With the Kuhn, it was more of, well, there's a lot of you. You're pretty good. Child, see you later. We got, like, not to make fun of anybody who has ADHD, but it's very ADHD kind of with the Kuhns, right?
Yeah.
It's very kind of scattered. So but each of the kids, interestingly, this is a nature versus a nurture moment, and it's clearly nurture winning out over nature. Is the kids have grown up on a human-based society who explore, figure out stuff, find out, make your own decisions, that type of stuff. And the kids are doing that. And that's what I think kind of happens there. Emerson is kind of his own separate story, and I do like how he, at the end of Infinity Shore, he gets through that mental block at the end.
Yep.
And are we going to talk about the fractal world in Infinity Shore at all?
Yeah.
Wait. First,
because Julie mentioned in her journal.
And Emerson remembered a lot.
He did.
Yeah, go ahead, Red.
Okay, so the interesting thing that it's not just the human influence, but the influence of their religion, where they are planning on being redeemed and going down into a redemption state where they're not sapient anymore. And so to them, they have a very comfortable relationship with death.
Yes.
That is something that the cultists don't understand, because the cultists all like lived 300 years or whatever. And actually, I think it's interesting considering the year we've been through and just American culture in general, that we're very uncomfortable with this big risk. It could lead to death or it could lead to something great. And Kip is seeing another squirrel. Go.
I'm reluctant to draw a parallel between
Well,
the
I mean,
current
I think
situation of a global pandemic
I was told no politics. I mean,
and the risk of being discovered by the Galactic Institutes.
in fairness, there is a pandemic that is caused by the Galactics in this book. 2, in fact.
There are 2 pandemics, yes, indeed. Rapidly cured by vaccines. Yay. But there definitely is a certain fatalism that is inherent to
Right.
all of the societies of Jijo that is pretty foreign even to the human streaker crew.
all but one society, one very distinct society of which Sarah is a part of.
Sure.
Otherwise, I
was gonna
agree.
say.
Because I want to put a pin on Sarah. Let's come back. Okay.
Sure. The average human, which is admittedly not represented among the Wufan's dream, they don't have a human, but is through Sarah, because Sarah, Emerson, and Reddy, of all people, decide to help the streaker. Ready for her own ends. But I would like to take a moment to talk about our other primary human viewpoint who has a sense of hope for human future, and that was Lester Campbell.
Lester was awesome. I mean, honestly, like Lester is the representation of knowledge, and seeking knowledge is a force for good, right? I mean, that's essentially what he is. Is that, like, there's no capital T truth out there, but there is little T truths out there that you can kind of gather and seek and use it for a positive end, and we can work together to accomplish these goals. He was great. I loved him, and his whole viewpoint stands in stark contrast to Joe Furr, who's the representative of Galactic Civilization, who believes in one capital T truth, and anybody who doesn't should be eradicated. So that's the only thing I have to say on Lester, but I think he was great.
I think Lester really conveyed the ability of the sages to experience blame and shame for their actions, and to experience the weight of the responsibility that they have on their shoulders, because they truly are pretty universally respected, except for a few heretics like Dedinger, for example. But the sages on Jijo they're really trying their best. And through his viewpoint, we can see that, and we see him go through and try his best up to the point of his own death.
And the way he dies was, I mean, there's ways to die and there's ways to die. And for a sage, he dies a pretty heroic death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And though not the most heroic in this book, because we also have Vubin, the old Gekek sage who makes his incredibly arduous journey to the egg.
Could we go back?
Where do you want to go?
I want to go back to Lester for a second.
Okay.
So one of the really cool things about Lester and the sages in general, because each species is required to have a sage, at least one, he really shows how the different cultures work together very well. You have the Urs with their analog computer, and you have the Trachea with their chemical making rings and their all that different stuff. And one of the things he helps do, because he's the oldest sage in that area, is coordinate everybody with the war effort.
Yep.
And it's great. I love it.
And he's like, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here, but you know what? Someone has to do it, and I'm going to do it.
And we're going to cobble this together.
I'm going to try and be a scientist right now. I'm going to try and rediscover rocketry along with all these people, and we're going to try and coordinate it and get these ballistic calculations from this analog computer, which Emerson helps out with. Love that computer, by the way. Fantastic science fiction concept.
Yes.
While we're talking about that, one of the things I like, it's a very Jijo thing, is that, sure, Lester's the one who's kind of helping, kind of like acting as the person in charge type of thing, but it's everybody trying to figure it out. The Hoons, the Urs, the Cunes, they're all doing this together as a group, and it's not just, quote, the Wolflings, end quote, who are doing this, who are inventing and discovering.
It's just a Wolfling attitude.
That's right.
Yes, exactly. And really, you almost feel like they're all wolflings now, like the
They
whole
are.
planet.
They absolutely are. I loved the moment where the Trakes were joking to the ones on either side of them because they're all making rocket fuel, but they're also having like little side conversations, mostly apparently dirty jokes because they're all pharmacists.
Yep, yep, that was great. It was so funny. And again, I would like to point out, Bren is actually very funny, often, even amidst all the tragedy.
I love Doctor Humor. It's fantastic.
I grew up around Dr. Humor, so well, my mom was a nurse, so
Nurse humor is good too. Slightly different, but good.
it's yeah,
Yeah. A lot of nurse humor is about doctors and their
yes,
inadvertent humor.
and about how they have god complexes.
Yeah, of course they do. Let's get back to Vubin and his journey to the egg. So, did anyone cry? I know I teared up when I saw this lonely Gekek circling around, and then the egg gets stabbed by the Jofur beam, and he gets caught in the backblast, the superheated steam and rock. Then he bleeds out his lifeblood, his brain fluid
Right.
gets spilled out, and his motive spindles are fraying all over the rock. And he gives up his life and communes with the egg on a deeper level than anyone ever has before. I thought it was a very touching little moment.
Are you seriously asking me if I cried?
Yeah.
What do you think happened, Kip?
I think you have a heart of stone like Era.
I cried like a little baby. I was so sad.
Very touching.
I spent the whole time thinking two things. Actually, after the fact, one was he the catalyst for the egg activating?
Mm-hmm.
Was he kind of like the ignition switch, right?
See, and this is classic Bren because you're just
He
going
doesn't
to
tell
keep
you.
guessing that for the rest of your life.
He doesn't tell you. Yeah, you strongly suspect it, right? So, and
Yep.
two, he drops some pretty heavy hints that by the end of Infinity Shore, I sit there and wonder: Are the Buyur? Did
Fire.
they transcend? Buyer? Did they
Voyeur.
transcend? Have they transcended? Like what? Because I don't think they went fallow or got punished or something. Like you leave Infinity Shore going. I think those guys transcended. Like they kind of have their own agenda, right?
I mean, Sarah's convinced that everyone was invited, right? Sarah
Yes.
and Sage Kurovsky, they're convinced that everyone got invited and that
Right.
part of it was because of the egg.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
So the interesting thing about the whole egg communion thing that happens with Bubben is that he discovers that the planet. So I originally thought that the Boyer had made the planet this way, but the planet was actually that way already because it remembered races before the Boyer. As he
She's right. She's right.
It happens once in a while.
I don't think that's necessary
I just think it's interesting.
because it could remember races before the buyer, but then once the buyer were added, that like kicked it over some threshold into full
Okay,
sense.
Okay.
but the
You
planet
are
still
both right. How about that? You're both
Okay.
right. I think that I think that Jijo is one gigantic psi stone, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's definitely that.
I think Jijo is a planet with a soul, and I
That's
think
right.
the Great Library doesn't really respect that.
I think the Galactic Library it's a stand-in for whatever you want to the Torah, the Bible, the whatever you want to the capital T truth. It has everything. Don't worry about it. All your answers are there.
Yep.
And if you try to find answers that are not there, then you are going to be dealt with. And that's what's happening to Jijo. That's what's happening to the humans. That's what's happening to everybody. At least according to the fanatics, the Jofur and the Tandu and the Gubru and all these other nasties we humans have been having to deal with.
So here's a question. We know that the egg sent out a burst that reactivated the dormant transfer point.
Right.
Do we think that maybe it also sent out some sort of burst that deactivated that transfer point in the first place?
Yes, I think so. I think that the Boyer did something to that star to make it the way it is.
I want to talk about the fractal world if we're going to talk about this. Those things relate, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Or at least I think they do based on Infinity Shore.
So we have the sun, the star. I don't
Yep.
remember the name of the star, but it puts out this weird carbon stuff.
Okay, so Ismanuti is not actually the star that Jijo is orbiting around.
No, I know.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
out there. And it puts out this weird carbon field and I think that the reason why it does that is the Boyer did it to the star and made the planet a refuge, if that makes sense.
I think that Sage
That's
Pirovsky definitely implied that much. Yep.
and my prediction is that we're going to find out the Boyer did something with the star and the transfer point.
It is quite the coincidence for 7 or 8 Sooner races to plant themselves on one planet in an entire galaxy over the span of 2,000 years.
And especially a galaxy that is supposed to be fallow.
Well, I mean, obviously any Sooner thing's going to be in a fallow area, but
Well, no, I mean, but it's not just the planet. It's like the whole.
yes, it's an entire galaxy of fallow worlds, and everybody found this one specific one.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
It's a honeypot. Like, that's a classic honeypot tactic.
Okay, Era, fractal us.
So we know in Infinity Shore that there is a story that we're being told by inference, right? It happens sometime after Star Tide Rising and before and or during Brightness Reef, actually before Brightness Reef, where the Streaker escapes and ends up in the fractal world, right? And the old ones, that's the beings that are there, they're quiescent until the Streaker crew gets there, right?
Yep.
And then the old ones break up into groups. Some torture poor Emerson, and that's how he ends up with the hole in his head, because they see Krydeki in his head and they mimic it. Others try to help them. And so the old ones that help them shunt them off to Jijo specifically, but so do the bad guys to Jijo, right? And to me, there's some type of connection there between the old ones in that fractal world and them getting sent to Jijo and the egg reopening the transfer point. So there's some type of connection between the buyer and the old ones of some sort that we're not seeing, at least at this stage in Infinity Shore.
One of the interesting things about that specifically, and this is going to be a journey, is that Psi in the Uplift universe works on probabilities. It works on how likely something is to happen, how improbable it might be. The universe itself has this probability science, which is similar in some ways to an idea of fate or destiny. If you can make something probable enough, if you can say like, oh, it's very probable that I went that far in that direction, you can like actually bend space-time to connect 2 points. And I think that that's what they did. I think they used one of those extremely risky probability drives, which allows an instantaneous jump between 2 locations. And I think that's how they send Emerson from the fractal world to the swamp, or to the atmosphere over Jijo, where he would then fall to the swamp. Because his ship was tiny. His little spaceship thing was like a capsule for one person, smaller than pretty much anything we've seen in the Uplift universe that qualifies as a spaceship. I don't think that it could go through a transfer point or through hyperspace on its own. That's like
it's like a little skiff that you leave on a plane that you intend like 4 or 5 people to use to travel to other galaxies, right?
It's like a message pod in like one of those pneumatic transfer tubes that they use at the bank. They put him in there and they sent him through using this external machinery, and then he just dropped out over Jijo in space and fell to Earth.
Everybody younger than Pip is going to wonder what the heck a pneumatic tube is.
Look, they still have them somewhere. They're like Home Depot occasionally. And I think that the probability drive that those things used resulted in some of the very low probability events that ended up happening on Jijo, that it entwined his fate with that of the planet somehow.
I was about to say there's a lot of low probability events that occur around Jijo. So to support Red's point, maybe Jijo is kind of like this probability lodestar, where it attracts low probability events.
It's powered by hope.
Because the world is one gigantic psi stone, right?
Yeah.
Jijo is the friends we made along the way.
Jijo is Gaia.
The other thing I do like about the whole fractal world story is that, I mean, you kind of get in bits and pieces up through that little journal entry from Jillian, what Emerson did to kind of save the Streaker. But then you kind of get I'd say 75% of the story at that point, and then you get the remaining 25% when Emerson breaks his mental block. And it's the first time barring Fiben in the Uplift War, it's the only time in the entire series you get to see a hero actually survive his hero's journey, come out the other side, and kind of go, oh, here you are, right? So it was really nice to kind of see, oh, wait, Emerson, you're really down on yourself, but you really were or are a hero. Like, you really did save the streaker. So, anyways.
While we're on Jijo as a living planet, let's just cover one last thing. The difference in environmentalism and attitudes towards it between the Jijoans, the humans, and the rest of galactic civilization.
So I actually wanted to bring up this point to you, Kit. So let me ask you this, Kit. One of your favorite series is the Bank series, right?
Yep.
The very first point you always make about that series is that it's a post-scarcity society.
Yeah.
Okay. In your opinion, does Bryn believe in post-scarcity societies given his
Absolutely
sentiments? Okay.
Absolutely not.
So talk about that.
I think Bryn believes in the primacy of matter and scarce resources. And he thinks that we will never achieve anything like a post-scarcity society unless we limit demand, not supply. The thing that leads to proper functioning societies in Bryn's world is curtailments on demand. Everything has to be managed there. I'm not against Lark's point of view entirely in that conscious control of reproduction is one of the key elements of that, especially among something like mechanical civilizations where they can just have a rapid doubling time and take over the entire universe unless somebody stops them. And he also makes that point.
In Heaven's Reach.
No, he makes that point earlier on in an epigraph.
Okay. Sorry.
In a combination of Lark, the rest of the High Sages, and really every Jijoan character that we get, I think Jijo is his example of a society that is going to get as close to post-scarcity as Bryn imagines it can get. They have the respect for not using everything for yourself. They have the respect of the commons. And I think that's how he would approach a utopian future society. Eventually, Jijo carrying the tenets of the scrolls still on, because those are deeply ingrained. And those carry such like basic concepts as you will not make poisons you cannot use. You will not dispose of poisons by just dumping them into the ground. You have to neutralize them and make sure they're non-toxic first. You have to only do things that are necessary and improve the human condition. And you cannot disrupt and destroy the natural world to do so.
Red, what do you think?
At least do it as little as possible. Do I think Bryn believes in a post-scarcity world?
No. What were your views? Because I was really interested to hear what Kip's views were on. Like, because Bryn, I'm going to agree generally with Kip's point that Bryn has a lot to say about environmentalism in all of his books. I mean, it's one of the main themes in the entire Uplift saga. So I wonder what your thoughts were about what Bryn has to say about environmentalism.
I don't know if I can answer this without maybe getting a little too political. There are certain environmentalists who seem to worship the earth and not human flourishing, but I think that Bryn is interested in finding a way for us to live our best lives. That sounds so... Anyway, to live our best lives and keep the earth thriving as well. And finding that balance between human flourishing. Like, it doesn't mean we can't write great literature and, have a couple babies and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's what he's looking towards. And using innovation to improve our lives, not in the material sense necessarily, but in the sense that it complements the world we live in, is how I would put it. Badly. Sorry. Put it very badly.
That's cool.
I do have one more point.
Sure.
I think that Bryn thinks that if you're going to have a high technology society with a lot of industry, do it on a moon, not a life planet.
Ah.
That's a good point. He does. He makes that point often.
Leave the life planets alone.
I think he has 3 strains of environmentalism he's talking about in his series, one of which he completely discredits because he never mentions it at all, which is use up the resources and don't worry about what happens. Worry about what happens later. That's a dead end, and we know that's a dead end because Earth survived that period and no longer goes by that tenet anymore. So he considers that a dead end theory of environmentalism. And then I think
suicidal.
He has 2... Exactly.
Right.
So I think he has 2 broad categories of environmentalism. One is the one which you two were talking about, which is what Jijo represents. And the other strain of environmentalism is what galactic civilization does, which is essentially to treat these vast swaths of property, for lack of a better word, like agriculture. Okay, we've used up enough of these resources now. We have to give it time to replenish before we come back and use it again, which is also it's another viable way to be environmentally conscious. There's just two ways to go about it. And then the other point that he makes with the strand that I'm talking about is that they give status and value to people or societies that are good caretakers of the environment. That's something that Bren is trying to emphasize, is that we should give more status and prestige to people who actually take steps to protect the environment.
Yep. The reason that humankind is able to get as many colonies as it has is because they have such a reputation as environmental stewards.
And they're the
Correct.
cleanup crew.
Yep. That's where you start if you're on the lowest rung of the ladder.
Right. It's true.
Okay, so there's environmentalism done. Let's go on to knowledge and science versus faith. Era, this is your question. Did you want to ask it?
I think I've already touched on my portion of it when I talked about Lester. But basically, we have two grand theories of life kind of going on. You have galactic civilization, which they have the capital T truth. And you have the galactic library, which has all knowledge you will ever possibly need. You don't need to question it. It's there. Okay, so if we give it to you, you have it and you're good to go. And all these societies basically think of it this way. It's like colonialism. Somebody comes to your society, they lift you up, they will give you clothes and technology and all these things you never had before. And here's a book that's going to explain why you have all this stuff. Don't question it and believe in it. And then you got these other people, like, for example, in that book, it says the earth is flat. Okay. And then you have this other society who grew up all by itself, and they did their own little experiments and they figured out how to do things all by themselves. And you have somebody kind of interacts with this capital T Truth Society, and he says, hey, the earth is round. And then there's a big fight, right? Because there's capital T Truth going up against little T Truth. That's kind of like the Middle Ages being represented in large galactic form right now between human society and galactic society. Didn't know what your general thoughts were about that. Either one of you.
What?
We've definitely talked about this a bit before, but I think that one thing that happened in this part of the book was it was nice to see another Wolfling trick in the hot air balloons.
That was so
And
fun.
specifically, they were not human hot air balloons. They were Urish hot air balloons. And it was nice to see a Wolfling trick from a galactic society that had been influenced by human knowledge on Jijo.
Well, and I think that proves the point of the little T Truth people, which is that, look, the Galactic Library does not have all the knowledge.
Yep.
Well,
Whatever knowledge it has, it may have a lot, but it doesn't have enough. And if people I mean species in general are simply allowed to innovate, they're going to be able to create lots of stuff that are just not found in the library.
And the Jofers sensors can't even see the balloons.
Yep.
That's right.
All they can see is because they put ship bits in the balloons, except for Dwar. He gets shoved into a balloon.
The inability to logically think by the Jofer and to logically analyze tactical situations that are foreign to them is one of their main downfalls in this book.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought you were talking about something different when you said faith and science, because I was thinking about the fact that there's and we've talked about this before too, there's a very heavy mysticism in these hard sci-fi books that you don't normally see.
There definitely seems to be.
There's a giant thinking planet, guys. I don't know what you call that besides mystic.
I'd call that explained by science.
Okay. But the point is that there's that important thing of the stories we tell and how that helps us make sense of the world that we live in. And one of the things that Alvin's dad says is like, take these stories out, take all of our stories. He hands them a whole bunch of.
Oh, that was so touching.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, a whole bunch of
The
other
new
books.
wave authors.
Yeah, the new wave authors. And none of them are human. He's like, take these stories out into the galaxy and let them know meaning. Because I think there's a lot of truth in fiction, and fiction allows us to think about truth in a way that we can't with a microscope or a math equation.
And we get Alvin saying, I'm not a total hummocker, Dad.
Anyway, the point is that it gives us a different way to think about truth. That's also important.
And Red, and I'll say this because I know that Kip and I are much out of everybody that we all know. I guess we're the two science fiction dudes, right? The best science fiction series, no matter which one it is, the best ones, at some point, they deal with what the Legendarium likes to call level 3 stuff. It all has to deal with philosophy and the human condition. And the science fiction is the vehicle to kind of get you to that point. Because at some point in that story, it comes down to the human condition and what kind of person or species or whatever we want humanity to end up being. And that's always a thread you find through all the best science fiction novels, and I'm including the Uplift universe as a great science fiction series.
Yep.
I mean, you see it in the Foundation, all the
undoubtedly qualified there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the point is that we're sense-making creatures. We need to make sense of the world, and we do it through stories.
I think it's very hard to talk about philosophy while completely ignoring religion. It's very difficult to make that feel realistic, or
That's true.
It's hard to make it resonate if you're just completely ignoring the side of philosophy that is religion.
Well, the thing is that religious thought is, millennia of philosophy.
Yep, it is. And it's affected human history.
Exactly. And it's still hanging out. So it must be saying at least something, even if you choose not to believe in God.
And new ones pop up every day.
There's that too.
And we can say this without spoiling Heaven's Reach. I mean, all of this that we're talking about, Brightness Reef and Infinity Shore, he's built the launching pad on which he's going to have a lot to say in Heaven's Reach. And by a lot, that's a capital A, L-O-T, a lot to say. So
everyone's leaving Jijo.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
So speaking of improbability, all 3 kids end up in space by accident in 3
all
different
3
ways.
Kids. Hey, Sarah did it on purpose.
I want to talk about Sarah, please. Can we talk about Sarah? Pretty please.
We can talk about Sarah now, and how I was completely wrong, because they say flat out that Sarah has never felt affected by any psi phenomenon before.
Yeah. I'll say this though, in Brightness Reef, as it's well recorded, I wasn't a huge fan of her at the beginning. By the end of Infinity Shore, she is like the superstar. She is the Jijo superstar, in my opinion. She's just, she's literally the 1 in a billion person who can just think faster, better, clearer than anybody else in the universe. And I mean, you get those geniuses that kind of come along in human history, and she's that person. And it's great because she doesn't see it at all. It's everybody else around her that sees it, And I love her personality. I love her journey. It's a character that I started off not liking, again, in Brightness Reef, who I've fallen in love with all over again by the end of Infinity Shore.
And everyone who's important who knows about Sarah is like, yeah, I've been reading your papers.
Yeah.
I've watched your career with interest.
Yes.
That marriage proposal from that senior sage from Tane at Byblos, he saw her mind.
Mm-hmm.
And she might have been like, no, I don't want to marry you and get tied down. But and turns out, no, she didn't want to get tied down. She wants to go off into space.
We all know somebody or met somebody who is they're just a shining star in whatever it is they do. They have no awareness of it because to them it's natural. It's just something they just do, right? And kind of the way Sarah acts is the way those people act, right?
And they talk multiple times about how Streaker has used up its complement of heroes, right? And I think they just gained a fantastic one.
I think they've gained several.
Yep, and Jijo is about to use up its complement of heroes too because
all the cool hand children and all, they're all going on Streaker.
Well, Ewa, look, I would say the biggest hero out of Jijo so far has been Ewasks.
Yeah.
And it's a thing that Bryn has, is that if you're really going to be heroic, with few exceptions, you don't make it out the other side, or if you do make it out the other side, you make it through significantly damaged. And the only exception out of any of the stories that does not happen is the Uplift War. I mean, the good guys come out on top. There's some questions that obviously, we've talked about at length in Uplift War about reproduction and stuff, but they come out of it pretty intact. Everywhere else, they're either dead, guys, they're dead.
They're not dead. They're not dead.
They're very dead.
They're not dead.
They're not dead.
Or they're very damaged. And I think that's what I mean. Like, it's a point that Bryn likes to hammer home, is that, like, there are people who are heroes but the reason they're heroes is that they're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. They're willing and capable of making it to help other people. It actually kind of goes in contrast with the Jofer. The Jofer are like the ultimate in selfishness, and they survive as a species by being ultra selfish, right? And Bryn is using heroes, quote, as a vehicle to say altruism, people who act selflessly, is another way for a species to propagate. You don't need a lot of them, but you do need some.
Which I would say is also why I kind of love all of the sages.
It's a great point.
They are very altruistic individuals, to the point where, like, it's recognizable to one of the helper species.
That's
trust a Zucker to know a sage, right? And
that's right.
We've gone on about how Lester Campbell had this secret human sage knowledge where he didn't believe that humans were capable of going down redemption's path. But I wonder if there was secret Trekkie sage knowledge with if Asks had always prepared for the day where he would be put under a master ring. If he'd been planning his life, and so had maybe every Trekkie high sage going down the line. Was that something they'd been working on their entire time on Jijo? Was that something they'd been planning for?
Huh.
Just as a last case, because a lot of Jijo culture is about planning for Judgment Day. And I wonder if the Trekkie had this extra thing to plan for.
I don't have an answer for you, but my mind is blown right now.
Yeah, I think
my mind is that fantastic job in blowing my mind. I don't know. It's a great point. It's a fascinating.
I'm so happy to have done that to you.
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't. I'm with Era. I have nothing to say, but it makes sense. It makes sense.
To support your point, the reason people are even able to survive on Jijo is because of the Trekkie. It's because they're basically pharmaceutical plants, right?
Yep. They make all the supplements.
Right. And the Trekkie or the Jofer, they mostly communicate by pheromones, right? By smell, detectable or not. It's very possible because, I mean, if you think about it, one of the recurrent themes that Ewas has when talking to his rings is, haha, you melted this or you melted that. And I mean, and it was done, I mean,
and like, oh, I recovered this.
Right. He did not have a lot of time to kind of formulate a plan, right?
Yep.
And we know that the Trekkie are contemplative by nature, so it's not like you would have thought of the plan on the spot, which supports your theory because it's like, it's game on. It's time to kind of like enact Operation whatever, right?
And given how like ably he managed to wrest control, like with great effort, but still managed to do it at those critical opportunities.
Right.
Managed to take advantage of those chances.
Yep.
Really makes me think that there was a long-term plan laid there.
Yep. I love the point. I never considered it. The next time I read the story, I'm gonna have to go with that thought in mind. Out of the first two books, like Asks or You Asks, even though it's a tragic journey, it's still my favorite journey out of all the characters in the story. Even though there's some that have cooler storylines or better arcs, just his journey, internal and otherwise, I don't know, it speaks to me. Especially, I guess now that I'm older, it speaks to me more. So
it's definitely a fantastic story.
Yeah.
You want to start closing it up? Anyone have any favorite characters or scenes that they wanted to mention that we haven't covered yet?
My favorite character in the second half of Infinity Shore is Lucky Ka, because they make some fun of him, quote, getting lucky, unquote, when he
oh my god, he got lucky. Oh my god.
So with that, right?
That's been the joke the whole time.
That's 100% been the joke, right? But
I think Kip's fine.
Oh no, I gotta wait for Kip to recover.
Okay, we're good.
All right, so. But then, basically his girlfriend gets abducted and he tries to save her and can't. And then even though Jillian's kind of asking / telling him to do this. He knows he has to leave her. And look, it's a dolphin, but it's a very human story of a gifted, talented person being given an impossible choice and having to make impossible decisions and having to live with the consequences of those decisions. And it's a tough journey, but I like Ka's personality and I like his journey, and the decisions he had to make along the way are very understandable and very human.
Yep. This definitely isn't a romance book, but of all of the romances in this book, I think it's the most relatable because it's the love of like a workplace crush.
This is a love story, not a romance. By definition, it can't be a romance.
Yep, this is absolutely a love
Don't
story.
get a happy ending.
There you go.
It's a love story with a pilot and his crush on the hot nurse. And they get together and then they're immediately separated. And it's the kind of like Jillian and Tom, great. They're in love. They are a bonded couple. They are an epic love story. Ka and Peepo are like boy and girl next door.
Except one's a hot nurse and one's a pilot.
Yes. Yes. But more achievable like job titles than secret agent.
They weren't genetically engineered for each other or anything.
I mean, they were genetically engineered. They were just never like thrown
Not
at
for
one
each
another
other.
by the planners. Yes. Yeah.
And to that point, I mean, I'm going to throw back to the Uplift War. There's actually a very small point. It's a small paragraph where they do talk about, if we get out of this alive, we're never actually going to be able to have a family, because either we're going to be breeding studs for the entire race of dolphins, or we're not going to be allowed to breed at all, right? I mean, they're very practical about this. So that kind of goes back to Red's earlier point in Uplift, all about reproduction and reproductive rights. So,
Though Peepo does have a nice plan. She wants to start her own line marriage. Whatever that means.
She wants her harem. That's what she wants.
She wants to start her own dynasty. That's what I get from that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she also wants a harem. So this is a very minor character, but Blade, who's one of the
I like Blade.
He's great. There's two things this character does. One is that he's the messenger, and so he kind of lets you see what's going on and helps connect all the pieces really well. And he's so brave and puts up with so much. He's dehydrated like the whole book because he can't get in the water. Just and there's this part where he's flying over the Joffer spaceship and he's just like, he's basically flipping them off.
That's so awful.
Making obscene movements with his mouth. Yep.
Right, exactly.
But nobody else would know it. Yeah, I love that. That's so awesome.
Yeah. And it's so funny. And then that's when they do figure out that the Joffer can't see the balloons because he's the one who figures it out. Look, I love Alvin. I love his journal and his little Bren projection. I mean, but he's just a great character. And
great character, fun character, and fun writing. Just really fun writing whenever you're in an Alvin chapter.
Agree.
Yeah. But Blade is great too, and doesn't get enough. He doesn't get enough attention. But then there's so many other people getting so much attention that he probably gets the right amount.
I will say, even though Blade is a minor character, I never forget about him. Not like once in my entire life since starting reading these books have I forgotten about Blade and his hot air balloon ride, but B, also how he helped out after the destruction of Uvum Town.
Right.
And he was a rescuer and first responder and did everything he could.
He got lost and then he showed up where he was. He's like, well, I'm here and there's work to do, so I'm just going to do it. You know?
He's a good guy. A really good guy.
Yep.
So who's your favorite character scene?
Oh, I've gone over how much I love you Ask and Asks and Jillian Baskin enough, I think.
Okay.
It's Jillian. I've got to love her. She has such a hard job. She keeps comparing herself constantly to Krydeki and Tom and being like, I'm doing a worse job at like Y than Tom would have done. I'm like not communicating with the dolphins as well as he would have. He had this instant knack, this rapport. And Krydeki had these plans, and like the stress atavism would have never affected so many of them under his watch. And then she's like, but maybe it's just because it's been going on for so long at this point, and even he wouldn't have been enough. But she's not sure. She's never sure about anything, but she's always sure enough to act.
So to that point, I think one of the great character traits about Jillian is that Tom was bred, like to your point, Star Tide Rising. He's an action hero. He was genetically bred to be an action hero. Krydeki was bred to be a genius captain. That was like his role, right? Julian was the medic.
Yep.
She was McCoy on Star Trek, right?
And she didn't
Janet
even get the
Jim-
leadership training. She didn't even get the training that he got.
So
She went to med school.
Right. So she's assuming duties that she's not really prepared for and having to perform under the kind of pressure you would never expect anybody to.
Yep.
You expect anybody else to buckle under that kind of pressure. So yeah, it's a great journey. It reminds me of any of you guys read Mickey Zucker-Reichart?
No.
So he wrote, or he wrote, it might be a she, I'm sorry, wrote these Nordic fantasy books. Anyways, it follows a story of this group of beings called the Renshai. And in the story, like one of the main characters, he loses the use of his legs, but he can use, he's a fantastic horseman. And he's like, I can't go out there and fight. I'm always afraid. I'm always afraid. I'm always afraid. And his teacher's like, being a hero doesn't mean that you go out and do things unafraid. If you do that, you're not a hero. You're just a schmuck, right? It's when you have that fear and then you face that fear and you overcome it. That's what makes you a hero. So Orly was designed for it. Jillian's having to face these things and overcome her doubts and fears. And, Orly's the action hero superstar, but she's the real hero of the story, right?
She is.
Oh.
She's the hero that's there. And she's the one who has to deal with it. And it should have crushed her a long time ago, but it hasn't.
Right.
Because she knows Tom's still alive out there.
She fights on his memory.
That's one of the reasons she fights on. That's one of the reasons she fights on. So, Red, predictions.
Well, I think I already actually said my 2 predictions. And it's hard for those of you who are listening. I actually have read the first part of Heaven's Reach, so it's going to be a little tricky, but I wrote down a couple things. So my first one is that I already said I don't think that the whole galaxy has been warded off because of the Zang, because of the hydrogen breathers. I think that there's a different reason, and the Boyer have something to do with it. And the other one is I predict Jijo will say safe because the Psi and the Star, the Psi Stone and the Star.
I'm going to ask you to make one more prediction.
Not their son, by the way, not Jijo's son.
Ismanuti.
Ismanuti.
I'm going to ask you to make one more prediction.
Oh dear.
Do you think Streaker makes it home? Do you think it doesn't make it home? Makes it home, or if it's left unclear? Makes it back to Earth. Yes, to be specific. Earth. I mean Earth.
I think it's more likely that it makes it back to Jijo than it makes it back to Earth. That's what I think.
Thank you very much.
But knowing Bren, it probably is going to be unclear.
Okay. Great. So I think that we can call this to a close for Infinity Shore. Thanks, you, guys. Both of you, for joining me today. You can join the discussion on Discord, Reddit, Twitter. And if you feel like supporting the Legendarium, you can support them on Patreon. Thank you, Horizon Brave, for getting this all started, and Craig for loaning us this little corner of his media empire. Our intro and outro music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punks. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.